The awakening signal. The golden halls of the Zephyrian imperial palace rang with celebration as Emperor Thane raised his crystal goblet high above his head. 300 years had passed since the glorious conquest of Earth, and today marked the anniversary of humanity's final defeat. The assembled nobles cheered as holographic displays showed the dead blue world, its surface scarred and lifeless, floating in the darkness of space like a warning to all who would dare oppose the Empire. Thane's violet eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he gazed upon his assembled court. Representatives from 1,000 conquered worlds bowed before him, their various alien forms draped in the finest silks and metals the galaxy had to offer. The Empire had grown strong on the bones of Earth, its technology and resources fueling an expansion that seemed unstoppable. Humanity had been the last great resistance, and their elimination had marked the beginning of true galactic peace under Zephyrian rule. 3 centuries ago, Thane declared, his voice echoing through the vast chamber, we eliminated the greatest threat our civilization had ever known. The humans fought with a desperation that nearly broke our resolve, but in the end, their primitive emotions proved no match for our superior intellect and technology. The crowd erupted in applause, tentacles and claws clicking together in rhythmic appreciation. But in the depths of space, far beyond the reach of imperial sensors, something stirred in the cosmic void. Ancient metal groaned as systems that had slumbered for 300 years began to hum with renewed life. Deep within the hull of the ESV Defiance, Captain Elena Vasquez opened her eyes for the first time in 3 centuries. The cryogenic chamber hissed as it released her from its frozen embrace, and she gasped as her lungs filled with recycled air that tasted of metal and age. Elena's hands shook as she pulled herself from the pod, her muscles weak from centuries of disuse. Around her, thousands of other chambers began to activate, their occupants awakening to a galaxy that had moved on without them. The ship's AI, designation Oracle, spoke in a voice that carried the weight of unimaginable patience. Captain Vasquez, welcome back to the land of the living. Current date, Standard Galactic Year 2387. Status report indicates successful completion of the long sleep protocol. All primary systems are operational, and fleet-wide awakening is proceeding as planned. Elena steadied herself against the chamber wall, her training kicking in despite the disorientation. She had been 28 when she entered cryosleep, commander of Earth's last hope when conventional warfare had failed. Now she felt ancient beyond her years, carrying the weight of a dead world's final gambit. Fleet status, Oracle, she commanded, her voice hoarse but gaining strength with each word. 743 vessels responding, Captain. The Exodus fleet remains intact and undetected. Long-range sensors indicate the Zephyrian Empire has expanded significantly during our absence, now controlling approximately 78% of known galactic space. Elena closed her eyes and felt the familiar burn of hatred in her chest. The Zephyrians had thought they had won when they glassed Earth's surface and hunted down the fleeing refugee ships. They had celebrated their victory while the real threat slept in the darkness between stars, waiting for the right moment to return. The Empire had grown fat and comfortable in their dominance, forgetting the cardinal rule of warfare. Never assume your enemy is truly dead. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on hundreds of other vessels. Admiral Marcus Kress, Elena's oldest friend and most trusted strategist, awakened aboard the ESV Retribution with the same cold fury burning in his heart. His ship was one of the heavy destroyers, built with technology that the Empire had never seen and wouldn't understand until it was far too late. The humans had learned much in their final desperate years, pushing the boundaries of physics and engineering in ways that more civilized species would have considered impossible. The awakening process took 6 hours to complete across the entire fleet. 6 hours for 743 ships to transition from silent derelicts to the most dangerous force the galaxy had ever seen. Each vessel was a masterpiece of human desperation and ingenuity, built not just to fight, but to win against impossible odds. They carried weapons that violated a dozen galactic treaties, powered by reactors that should have been theoretically impossible, crewed by soldiers who had volunteered to sleep until their dying world could have its revenge. Meanwhile, in the Yao, Imperial capital system. The celebration continued unaware of the storm that was building in the outer rim. General Vox, the Empire's supreme military commander, stood at attention as Emperor Thane regaled the court with tales of the human war. The general's 4 arms were crossed behind his back, his insectoid features showing the proper respect for his sovereign's words, but privately, he wondered why they continued to dwell on such ancient history. The humans were clever, I'll grant them that, Thane continued, swirling the luminescent wine in his goblet. Their final stratagem nearly caught us off guard, launching thousands of ships into deep space, hoping to establish colonies beyond our reach. But we hunted them down, didn't we, General? Vox's mandibles clicked in agreement. Indeed, my Emperor. Our pursuit fleets eliminated the last human vessels within 50 years of Earth's fall. The galaxy has known true peace ever since. But even as the words left his mouth, alarms began to sound in the deepest levels of the Imperial monitoring stations. Deep space sensors, positioned at the very edge of known space, detected energy signatures that didn't match any known technology. The readings were faint at first, easily dismissed as cosmic background radiation or the death throes of distant stars, but they grew stronger with each passing hour, and the patterns they displayed were disturbingly familiar to those few technicians, old enough to remember the human war. Lieutenant Zara, a young Zephyrian communications officer, stared at her readings with growing alarm. The energy signatures were moving, accelerating toward inhabited systems with purpose and coordination that suggested intelligence behind their movements. More troubling still, the quantum resonance patterns matched archived data from human vessels, data that should have been nothing more than historical curiosity. She hesitated before activating the priority channel to General Vox's command center. To interrupt the anniversary celebration with what might prove to be sensor ghosts would end her career. But something deep in her training told her that these readings represented a threat that couldn't be ignored. The communication reached General Vox as he was raising his own toast to the Emperor's health. His celebration mood soured instantly as he absorbed the lieutenant's report, his compound eyes narrowing as he processed the implications. Without a word, he excused himself from the festivities and made his way to the nearest command center, his mind racing with possibilities that he didn't want to consider. The central command hub of the Imperial Palace was a marvel of technology, with holographic displays showing real-time data from across the Empire's vast territory. But as General Vox studied the incoming reports, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the recycled air. The energy signatures were definitely artificial, definitely coordinated, and definitely heading toward Imperial space with hostile intent. Magnify Sector 77 Alpha, he commanded, and the display zoomed in on a region of space that should have been empty. Instead, it showed hundreds of contacts moving in perfect formation, their trajectories calculated to bring them into contact with Imperial forces within days rather than weeks. "Sir," stammered the duty officer, a nervous Zephyrian whose scales had turned pale with fear. "The quantum signatures match archived human technology, but that's impossible. We eliminated their entire species 3 centuries ago." General Vox studied the display with the eye of a veteran warrior who had seen too much death to be easily surprised. But this discovery shook him to his core, because it meant that everything they had believed about their greatest victory was a lie. The humans hadn't been defeated. They had merely been sleeping, waiting for the Empire to grow comfortable and careless. As if summoned by his thoughts, every communication array in the command center suddenly activated simultaneously. Static filled the air for a moment, then cleared to reveal a human face on every screen. It was a woman in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a military style and eyes that burned with the cold fire of absolute determination. She wore a uniform that belonged to no nation or organization the Empire recognized, but the authority in her voice was unmistakable. "Greetings, Zephyrian Empire," Captain Elena Vasquez said, her words carrying across space to reach every Imperial facility simultaneously. "My name is Elena Vasquez, Captain of the Earth Defense Fleet. I bring you greetings from a world you thought you had destroyed, and a people you believed you had conquered." The command center fell silent except for the hum of machinery and the rapid breathing of terrified officers. General Vox stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The woman's technology was impossible. No single transmission should have been able to penetrate every defense system the Empire had built over 3 centuries of expansion. For 300 years, you have celebrated the death of Earth, Elena continued, her voice never wavering from its calm professional tone. You have told yourselves that humanity was weak, that we fell because we lacked the strength to match your superiority. But you made one critical error in your calculations. You assumed that the ships you hunted down in the Outer Rim were our evacuation fleet. She leaned forward slightly, and her smile was colder than the vacuum of space. They were not evacuees, Emperor Thane. They were bait. While you wasted time and resources chasing shadows, the real Exodus fleet disappeared into the darkness beyond your sensors, beyond your reach, beyond your imagination. We have been waiting, sleeping, preparing for this moment when your guard would finally drop. The transmission paused, and in that silence, General Vox could hear his own heart beating like a war drum. Around him, officers scrambled to trace the signal's origin, but their efforts were futile. The human captain's technology was beyond anything they had encountered before. You killed our world, Elena said, and now emotion crept into her voice like ice forming on steel. You murdered billions of innocent people and turned our home into a monument to your cruelty. But humanity's greatest strength was never our weapons or our ships. It was our refusal to surrender, our ability to endure any hardship, and our absolute commitment to protecting those we love. She stood up, and the camera pulled back to show the bridge of her vessel. It was unlike anything in Imperial records, with clean lines and technology that seemed to bend reality around it. Behind her, other figures moved with the efficient purpose of a crew that had trained for this moment their entire lives. Earth's children have come home, Emperor Thane, and we have brought gifts. The reckoning begins. The Imperial Palace erupted into chaos as Elena's transmission ended. General Vox watched, his carefully ordered world collapse in real time as reports flooded in from across the Empire. The humans hadn't simply returned with a single fleet. They had awakened simultaneously in dozens of star systems, their vessels emerging from the cosmic background radiation like predators stepping out of tall grass. Emperor Thane burst into the command center with his ceremonial robes flowing behind him, his violet eyes blazing with fury that could have melted steel. The anniversary celebration had ended abruptly when the human transmission reached the palace's main hall, sending noble guests fleeing in panic as 3 centuries of comfortable security evaporated in the span of a few minutes. Explain to me, Thane said, his voice deadly quiet, how an extinct species managed to appear in my empire without triggering a single early warning system. General Vox's forearms gestured helplessly at the tactical displays, which now showed red contacts throughout Imperial space. Each contact represented dozens of human vessels, and more were appearing every hour as whatever cloaking technology they used finally failed or was deliberately deactivated. My Emperor, their technology is beyond our current understanding. These ships don't register on our sensors until they choose to be seen. Our entire detection grid was designed to identify known threats, but the humans appear to have developed capabilities that operate outside our technological paradigm. Thane's expression grew darker as he absorbed the implications. The Empire's military superiority had been built on the assumption that they possessed the most advanced technology in the galaxy. If humanity had somehow leaped beyond their capabilities during their 3-century absence, then everything the Zephyrians had built was suddenly vulnerable. Meanwhile, aboard the ESV Defiance, Captain Elena Vasquez stood in her ready room studying holographic displays that showed the Empire's current military deployments. The information had been gathered by stealth probes that had been observing Imperial forces for months, tiny mechanical spies that had infiltrated every major installation without being detected. Admiral Marcus Kress entered the room with a data pad in his weathered hands. Like Elena, he had aged only in spirit during the long sleep, carrying the burden of their mission like a physical weight. His tactical mind had been busy since awakening, analyzing 3 centuries of Imperial expansion and identifying the weak points that would bring their enemy to its knees. Fleet status report, Marcus, Elena said without turning from her displays. All vessels are operational and crews have completed orientation protocols. The awakening went better than we hoped. We lost only 12 ships to system failures during the sleep cycle, leaving us with 731 operational vessels. More importantly, our manufacturing ships are already beginning production of replacement munitions and spare parts. Elena nodded, satisfied. The Exodus fleet had been designed for extended independent operations, carrying not just weapons and crew, but entire industrial complexes that could sustain a war effort for decades without external support. While the Empire had grown comfortable with their supply lines and established infrastructure, the humans had built their fleet to operate as a completely self-sufficient force. "Target selection?" she asked. Marcus activated his datapad and the room's displays shifted to show key Imperial installations highlighted in red. "I've identified 47 primary targets that will cripple their military response capability. Communication relays, supply depots, shipyards, and training facilities. If we hit them simultaneously, we can blind them and cut their forces off from Central Command." Elena studied the targets with the cold calculation of a professional soldier. Each installation represented thousands of Imperial personnel, but she had stopped thinking of enemy casualties as individual lives long ago. The Empire had made that choice for her when they turned Earth into glass and ash. "Approved. Signal the fleet commanders. Operation Retribution begins in 6 hours." As the human fleet prepared for their opening strike, the Empire scrambled to mount a defense against an enemy they didn't understand. General Vox had deployed every available ship to protect critical installations, but his forces were spread thin across the vast territory the Empire controlled. Worse, his intelligence reports painted a picture of human technology that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of physics. The first Imperial fleet to engage the humans was the Third Battle Group, stationed near the industrial world of Kepler, Prime. Admiral Zeth, a veteran of dozens of conquests, commanded 12 heavy cruisers and their escort vessels as they moved to intercept a small formation of human ships that had appeared in the system's outer reaches. "Unknown vessels," Admiral Zeth broadcast on standard diplomatic frequencies. "You are in violation of Imperial space. Surrender immediately, or we will open fire." The human response came not in words, but in action. The ESV Nemesis, a destroyer that looked deceptively small compared to the Imperial cruisers, accelerated toward the enemy formation at speeds that should have been impossible for a vessel of its size. Admiral Zeth ordered his ships to open fire, filling space with energy beams and explosive projectiles that could have leveled cities. But the human ship moved like something alive, twisting through the defensive fire with maneuvers that generated gravitational forces that should have crushed any crew aboard. It closed the distance to the Imperial flagship in seconds, and what happened next would be replayed in naval academies for generations. The Nemesis didn't fire conventional weapons. Instead, it released a cloud of microscopic machines that swarmed over Admiral Zeth's cruiser, like metallic locusts. Within minutes, the massive warship's hull began to dissolve at the molecular level, its armor plating separating into component atoms that drifted away in glittering clouds. Admiral Zeth managed to send one final transmission before his ship's hull integrity failed completely. "They're not using weapons, they're using controlled entropy. How is this possible?" The other Imperial vessels fled in disorder, their commanders too shocked by what they had witnessed to mount any effective resistance. In less than an hour, the Third Battle Group had been reduced from 12 ships to 3, and those survivors carried news that sent waves of terror through Imperial High Command. Similar scenes played out across the Empire as human strike forces demonstrated capabilities that redefined the very concept of warfare. They didn't just destroy Imperial installations, they unmade them, reducing sophisticated technology to its constituent elements with weapons that operated on principles no Imperial scientist could explain. Emperor Thane stood in his private chamber, staring out at the capital world's 3 moons as reports of defeat after defeat reached his ears. In a single day, humanity had crippled a third of his naval forces and left his remaining commanders too terrified to engage them directly. The empire that had taken centuries to build was crumbling in real time, and he found himself facing an enemy that seemed to possess capabilities that bordered on the divine. "My Emperor," General Vox said as he entered the chamber, his usual confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. We've lost contact with 17 major installations. Our remaining fleets are requesting permission to fall back to defensive positions around core worlds." Thane turned from the window, his violet eyes reflecting a mixture of rage and something that might have been fear. Defensive positions? Against an enemy that can dissolve our ships at the molecular level? What defense could possibly be effective against such power? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. For 3 centuries, the Empire had ruled through superior firepower and technological advancement. Now they faced an enemy that had transcended those advantages entirely, wielding forces that seemed to operate outside the normal constraints of physics and engineering. Back aboard the Defiance, Elena received reports from her fleet commanders, with grim satisfaction. The opening phase of Operation Retribution had exceeded all expectations, demonstrating that humanity's long sleep had been far from peaceful. While their bodies rested in cryogenic stasis, their artificial intelligences had continued working, pushing the boundaries of human technology into realms that no other species had dared to explore. "Admiral Kress," she called to her second-in-command. "What's our next move?" Marcus consulted his tactical displays, which showed Imperial forces retreating from dozens of systems simultaneously. "Phase 2 calls for strategic strikes against their core worlds. But Elena, we need to consider the political implications. If we push too hard too fast, we might force them into desperate measures." Elena's expression hardened. "Desperate measures? Marcus, they glassed our homeworld and hunted our people like animals across the galaxy. There are no measures too desperate for what they deserve." But even as she spoke, she knew her old friend was right. The Empire still controlled vast resources and billions of troops. If they were pushed into a corner, they might choose to take as much of the galaxy with them as possible, rather than accept defeat. The humans had returned not just for revenge, but to reclaim their place among the stars. That meant there had to be something left to reclaim when the war ended. However, she continued after a moment of thought, we can't let them regroup and adapt to our capabilities. Signal the deep strike teams. It's time to show Emperor Thane that his palace isn't as secure as he believes. As her orders went out across the fleet, Elena felt a familiar weight settle on her shoulders. Command in. Wartime was a burden that few could truly understand, requiring decisions that would haunt her for the rest of her life. But she had accepted that burden 3 centuries ago when she volunteered for the Exodus fleet, trading her chance at a normal life for the opportunity to ensure that humanity's enemies would never sleep peacefully again. In the depths of space, cloaked ships began moving toward the Empire's capital system, carrying weapons and soldiers who had trained for this moment their entire lives. The first phase of humanity's return had announced their presence and demonstrated their capabilities. The second phase would prove that nowhere in the galaxy was beyond their reach. Emperor Thane would learn, as so many tyrants before him had, learned that humans were most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. And these humans had lost everything except their determination to make their enemies pay for every life, every world, every dream that had been taken from them. The war for humanity's future was just beginning, and the Empire was about to discover why their ancestors had warned them never to corner a predator with nothing left to lose. Earth's children had come home, and they had brought with them technologies that would reshape the very foundations of galactic civilization. The reckoning had begun, and it would not end until justice had been served in full measure.